everyone. I'm Vanessa Grossel, Policy Analyst at the Council of State Governments. I serve as a staff liaison to CSG's Healthy States National Task Force, which is composed of 4 subcommittees examining such topics as capacity, preparedness, and resiliency, leveraging innovation, state health systems return on investment, and interventions to save lives. I'm joined today by Lori M. Reilly, Esquire, Chief Operating Officer at the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, to talk about the race to a vaccine. Ms. Reilly provides executive-level management, leadership, and strategic direction for PhRMA, where she oversees PhRMA's advocacy activities, including its federal, state, and international government affairs and alliance development work. She has nearly 2 decades of experience at PhRMA, working in many capacities, leading the development and implementation of legislative, regulatory, and political strategies to advance policies that encourage patient access as well as medical innovation. In 2018, she was named a top lobbyist by The Hill based on her extensive record of working in a bipartisan manner with Congress and collaborating with stakeholders across the healthcare industry. She works across PhRMA to develop and advocate for practical policy solutions that will lower costs for patients. And Ms. Reilly received her Juris Doctorate from the University of Nebraska College of Law, and she currently resides in Alexandria, Virginia with her husband and their 4 children. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for having me and for the warm introduction.
Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. What progress has the pharmaceutical industry made so far toward treatments for a vaccine for COVID-19?
Thanks for asking that question. I know how top of mind that is for everyone. I feel like all of my friends and family are asking me those questions every day, so understand there's widespread interest in it. The good news is across the country, our researchers are literally working around the clock in the hopes of finding something that helps states get back to a sense of normalcy. And I think the progress is really promising. My association, PhRMA, represents the innovative biopharmaceutical industry, and our members have been focused really in kind of 4 different areas in terms of our response to COVID-19. The first is really on diagnostics. How do we determine whether or not somebody has COVID? While we're pharmaceutical companies, we do have companies that have stepped up in the diagnostic space. So, for example, Eli Lilly, which is based in Indiana, took one of its own labs to be able to perform testing for people in Indiana. They started first with the first-line health care responders, but have since expanded that. Another one of our companies, Genentech, also has a diagnostics division, and they were successfully able to come up with a diagnostic to help here. So that's really the first area. And I would say, again, while it's not the primary focus of the pharmaceutical industry, many companies have stepped up on that area. The second area is really looking at the vast libraries that the companies have of medicines that they've already done research and development on. Some of those may be treatments that, for whatever reason, didn't get approved because they didn't show success in treating what they were intended to. Some of them may be drugs that are already on the market and treating other things. We've seen lots of news recently, including some yesterday, about an existing therapy that is now showing promise in treating patients that are hospitalized and require either ventilation or oxygen for COVID-19. And of course, the very first treatment that we know that has been approved by Gilead has remdesivir, was a drug that was used to study Ebola previously. So companies are kind of doing a search with what's in our library, what may be successful. And again, we're seeing some good progress there. The next area is really new novel treatments and therapies. So starting something kind of completely new. And we've seen a lot of excitement here, I would say, in some of the plasma technologies. So companies are looking at patients that have successfully overcome COVID-19 and getting antibodies that demonstrate that, you have in fact had the disease and successfully fought it. And they use those antibodies to make medicines. So, for example, some companies are producing what's known as a monoclonal antibody, where they find the best antibodies, the strongest ones, and they genetically reproduce those. And we have a few of those that are in development, and I think those show a lot of promise and excitement, both in terms of preventing people from getting COVID in the first place, but also in terms of treating people that already have it. So again, lots of exciting news there. Over 1,000 clinical trials are currently underway, just in the new investigational therapies. So that's a lot of good promise. And then the last area, but the one that we often hear the most about, is really developing a new vaccine to treat and prevent future infections. Right now, I think there's about 120 unique vaccines that are currently in some stage of development. 10 are already in testing in actual people, which is fantastic. It's literally just months after we were able to sequence the virus and understand more about it. So we are, taking this issue extremely seriously. I think the level of collaboration and engagement in our industry has never been greater. And for folks that want to know more, I would say we've got a lot of information on our website, www.pharma.org /coronavirus. So for anyone that wants to keep up to date on the latest and greatest, we keep that updated with new information all the time, because quite honestly, it's new stuff coming out almost every day right now, which is great.
Thank you. And could you explain why the industry was in a good position to take on this challenge and really expedite its search for a treatment or a vaccine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's important to note that the industry wasn't, caught flat-footed here. In fact, we're uniquely positioned for a couple of reasons. The first is just the kind of deep scientific knowledge that has been accumulated over literally decades, experiences that our companies have had with other viruses. So people have probably heard in the past of SARS and MERS, even influenza, HIV, and hepatitis C. And that knowledge that has been gleaned over a very long time has helped, and I would say improved, our likelihood of success in developing therapies and potentially a vaccine to help address this. The second reason is really also just the little billions of dollars in technologies that the industry has developed and used over time that has really shrunk the amount of time it takes now to decode a virus once we know it exists and then develop a potential vaccine. So that is really new and exciting. I think when you think back to SARS, Dr. Fauci had said previously that, I think it was 20 months from the time we had recognized the virus of SARS till we could actually test it in people. However, in this case, it was literally months before we were able to decode the virus due to the technology we have that makes that faster to actually getting a vaccine that could be treated or that could be tested in humans. And then, the other area I would say is just our ability to manufacture and broadly disseminate vaccines and treatments. Right now, companies are looking about how they can partner with others to ensure that if their medicine or their vaccine is successful, that they're going to be able to manufacture it and make it available. We know that the demand is going to be very high when we get some of these hopefully new treatments approved. And so companies today are ramping up production capacity well before they even know whether their medicine is going to get approved. So they're spending, in some cases, $1 billion or more to say, I'm going to establish these new contracting relationships with other manufacturers to start producing a medicine that I don't even know if it's going to get approved yet, but if it does, the demand will be there immediately, and they want to be ready if and when that happens. So that's, it's unique in some ways that companies would kind of do this at risk, so to speak, not knowing whether or not their treatment or vaccine will be successful. The kind of untold story, I would say, of drug development generally is unfortunately we fail much more than we succeed. About 90% of medicines that are studied, unfortunately, never make it to market. So there is a high level of risk, but I think myself and others have a high level of confidence knowing the serious nature that companies have approached this with. I think there's a lots of reasons why we, I think, are uniquely situated. And again, companies are anxious and rising to the challenge.
All right, you mentioned the clinical trials and the manufacturing process, and there's a lot of talk about these things right now. And I hoped you would help us understand some of the timing involved and the process for developing a vaccine or treatment.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know, there's been a lot of news and it seems at times a little bit all over the map. Maybe to take a step back, I think most estimates that we had seen was that it would take a minimum of 18 to 24 months for a potential FDA approval of a COVID vaccine. That was kind of the early news, I would say, we heard from government and others. But I think it's important to put maybe those numbers into some context. I think what we've heard as of recent is that timeline is moving further along, faster than once thought, maybe, which is a positive. It's also a lot less time, even if it were to take 18 to 24 months, significantly less time than it has taken previously. And part of the reason that has been the case is companies are doing many steps concurrently that oftentimes would happen consecutively. Certainly not compromising safety. That is of paramount of concern to our industry. We can't jeopardize safety. We are moving very quickly. As I mentioned before, in 2003, it took 20 months from sequencing SARS to actually the first human study of a vaccine. And today we've shrunk that time to less than 4 months from sequencing COVID to the first human study. Knowing the virus's genetic sequence, companies can then, synthesize and scale up production of a vaccine, oftentimes in a matter of weeks. And they can use other things called adjuvants, which help boost the immune response and minimize the amount of vaccine that is needed. The tricky part, of course, is just the immune system in our body. It's incredibly complex. We can't always predict how an individual immune system is going to respond to a vaccine, which is why we have to run these very large clinical trials to show that not only is it safe, but it's actually effective in patients and doing what it's supposed to do. And as I mentioned before, there is a high failure rate for vaccines. Typically only 5 to 10% of vaccines in development actually succeed, which is why we need a lot of approaches. I think we've got over 120 vaccines in some level of development now. But luckily, we've got a lot of shots on goal, so to speak. And again, I'm confident that we will have a vaccine. Again, many of those trials are currently underway, and I think, hopefully we're looking at maybe the end of this year to have at least one, if not more, of those vaccines that ultimately will get approved and can be used in patients.
That's great news. Thank you, Lori. How has the pharmaceutical industry worked collaboratively with the public sector toward this common goal?
Yeah, another really good question. I think, COVID is a challenge that really demands attention from all of us and working together as collaboratively as we can if we're going to solve it. And I think the collaboration in this instance across the board has been unprecedented. Just as many communities and states and locales are coming together, so are our companies. And even across our companies, they are competitors in the marketplace, but those competitive interests have been set aside to advancing efforts to combat the virus. And it's really been a team effort, which is nice to see. We've, of course, been working very closely with the U.S. government, global health authorities. That includes everyone from the Food and Drug Administration, the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, the World Health Organization, and of course, many states too. we have, worked from, I'll just give you one example, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is a branch of the National Institutes of Health. We worked with them closely early on to run a clinical trial with patients affected with the virus at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. The results of that trial helped lead to the now approval of remdesivir, the first drug that's been approved to treat COVID-19. So that's been fantastic. And we're also sharing what we learn from clinical trials in real time with governments and other companies, so that no one's kind of wasting effort. If we find out something isn't working, we're sharing that knowledge, because the goal here is to get something into the market that works. And competition has kind of gone a bit to the wayside in the spirit of public health. And companies, and I mentioned this before, they're sharing their capacity to ramp up production too. So once we get a medicine or a vaccine, companies said, hey, I've got spare capacity over here, I can help there. And that's really important, because I don't think any manufacturer alone could have the type of capacity necessary to produce and fit the demand that currently exists. And we're also working very importantly with government and insurers to make sure that once we get treatments and vaccines available, that they're affordable and accessible to patients. This is really important. I know it's so top of mind today, as many people are struggling with the economic downturn we've seen. States are struggling as well. How do we ensure that what we bring will be available and it'll be accessible and affordable? And I would say many companies today are committing millions in both direct monetary and in-kind contribution to support our many healthcare workers who are on the front line, and communities around the world that are battling COVID.
Well, thank you. That leads me into my next question, which is regarding costs. And I was just wondering what insight you have regarding costs. I know that pharma has invested a lot in research and development, but what might be expected of states and of their residents when a vaccine or treatment is approved and available?
Sure, and I know the folks that are listening will certainly join me in looking forward to that day when we have an approved treatment and vaccine, so we can get back to some semblance of normalcy. And obviously, many listening on this call are responsible for their state's economic health as well as its physical health. And I know there's a lot of concerns that likely exist about access and affordability. And we are working to make sure that when treatments and vaccines are approved, they will be available and affordable for patients. I would say if you look back at a track record of other kind of pandemic situations, companies have priced their products responsible. We don't expect that affordability will be a problem this time. I know Dr. Fauci has been asked this in the past, and he's remarked that he has seen in his experience situations when we've been involved in the development of vaccine where pharmaceutical companies priced it at a point that was out of reach for patients. Ultimately decisions on pricing are made by individual companies, but I would note that many companies have already publicly stated how they're either donating their existing medicines and focused on making sure people will receive vaccines at an affordable price. We saw, for example, two companies, Sanofi and Novartis, who donated over 100 million doses of hydrochloroquine when that was being studied. I think many studies into that medicine have been halted because it wasn't shown to be effective, but at the time it was unclear, and so companies stepped up and made those donations. Gilead, as I mentioned before, which is the maker of remdesivir, donated its entire stockpile of the medicine to the government to ensure that patients could get ready access without a fear of having to pay for it. Johnson & Johnson, one of our companies who is a vaccine in development, has already said they plan to distribute their vaccine on a not-for-profit basis here. And there's been a number of partnerships that we've seen take root. So the other thing I would mention is obviously people are very focused on making sure we can get access to affordable treatments for COVID, but of course many patients today may be struggling with how they're affording the medicines they're taking today, be it for diabetes or hypertension or AG, and companies have made great strides in enhancing their patient support programs to ensure that patients get access to the medicines they need. And we will continue to provide support to communities in the states as well. And of course, many of the state agencies are doing phenomenal work ensuring patient access to medicines. I would just say we have a website for our medicine assistance tool. It's www.mat.org or MAT. And that's a great repository that people can go to find out information about programs that may exist. As we know, so many across the country are grappling with how to afford necessities like medicine. So I would encourage folks to look there should they need assistance in directing people to a place to get medicines for whatever their health need might be.
Great. And lastly, what does all of this mean for state policymakers moving forward?
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, the recovery, I think, from I would say devastating economic impact and pandemic will be, my sense is, over many years. You know, we're seeing obviously a lot of that effect now, but that's not going to end, unfortunately, anytime soon. We are working with legislatures across the country to support some proactive policies that get at some of the underlying affordability challenges that we know so many patients face, to ensure that, you know, as patients go to the pharmacy counter to pick up their medicine, what can we do to reduce the prices at the pharmacy in a way that balances our ability to continue to innovate. I think, you know, the U.S. system thankfully has allowed our industry to both be available to address a global pandemic, invest billions of dollars, and kind of put an all hands on deck, which is really important. And I think the system that we have today has allowed that to happen. And we have to balance that with patients' need, on the other hand, to be able to afford and access the medicines they need. So we want to work with legislatures on ensuring that balance and also ensuring that we enact some maybe proactive reforms that would do a better job at helping patients better afford their medicine. So we had initiated a platform in many different states on a handful of policy ideas, one of which was ensuring that, you know, when our companies initiate with insurance companies, for example, over the price of a medicine, we often offer pretty big discounts and rebates to the insurance companies who are buying these medicines, often in bulk. Unfortunately, those dollars don't always make their way back to the patient that's having to pick up that medicine at the pharmacy counter. And if they did get the benefit of those discounts, they would save a lot of money, oftentimes 50% or more on their medicine. So we think that's an area that some states have already started looking at, and the federal government as well, but I think an area that's ripe for looking at again in 2021 if our goal is to, how can we do things that actually reduce costs that patients pay. You know, another idea is the fact that we do, companies do offer assistance to patients, even those with insurance, who may struggle to pay the full price of their medicine, which they are asked to do before they reach their deductible. But unfortunately, at times, insurance companies don't count that assistance in terms of helping a patient get to their deductible or getting to their out-of-pocket maximum. And a handful of states, 4, in fact, have enacted legislation this year that said that, you know, if a patient is getting assistance to help pay for their medicine, that should count towards a patient reaching their deductible or out-of-pocket maximum. So that's another idea. Again, patient-friendly, patient-focused ideas to ensure that we're helping those in need now more than ever. So, you know, I thank you for your, you know, question. I think it's a really important one. And again, to recognize the importance of a system that we have in the U.S. that does encourage innovation and does encourage, you know, companies doing the kind of research it does, but that also provides incentives and sustains that incredible innovation and progress that we've seen over the last few years.
Well, thank you, Lori, for joining us today. We appreciate you for making time during this extremely busy and also exciting time for the pharmaceutical industry to share your expertise, which will help greatly to inform the work of our task force. I'm Vanessa Grothel at CSG headquarters in Lexington, Kentucky, and I've been speaking with Lori Reilly, Esquire, Chief Operating Officer at the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America.